Hudden and Dudden and Donal O'Leary. There was once upon a time 2 farmers, and their names were Hudden and Dudden. They had poultry in their yards, sheep on the uplands, and scores of cattle in the meadowland alongside the river. But for all that, they weren't happy. For just between their 2 farms, there lived a poor man by the name of Donal O'Leary. He had a tumble-down cottage over his head, and a strip of grass that was barely enough to keep his 1 cow, Daisy, from starving. And though she did her best, it was but seldom that Donal got a drink of milk or a roll of butter from Daisy. You would think there was little here to make Hudden and Dudden jealous. But so it is. The more one has, the more one wants. And Donal's neighbours lay awake of nights, scheming how they might get hold of his little strip of grassland. Daisy, poor thing, they never thought of. She was just a bag of bones. One day, Hudden met Dudden, and they were soon grumbling as usual, and all to the tune of,
"If only we could get rid of that vagabond Donal O'Leary out of the country."
Let's kill Daisy. If that doesn't make him clear out, nothing will.
No sooner said than agreed. And it wasn't dark before Hudden and Dudden crept up to the little shed where lay poor Daisy, trying her best to chew the cud, though she hadn't as much as seen enough grass in that day as would cover your hand. And when Donal came to see if Daisy was all snug for the night, the poor beast had only time to lick his hand once before she died. Well, Donal was a shrewd fellow, and downhearted though he was, began to think if he could get any good out of this sad business. He thought and he thought, and the next day you could have seen him trudging off early to the fair, the poor cow's hide over his shoulder, every penny he had jingling in his pockets. Just before he got to the fair, he made several slits in the hide, put a penny in each slit, walked into the best inn of the town as bold as if it belonged to him, and hanging the hide up to a nail in the wall, sat down and says he to the landlord,
"Some of your best whiskey."
But the landlord didn't like his looks.
"Is it fearing I won't pay you, you are? Why, landlord, I have a hide here that gives me all the money I want."
And with that, he hit it a whack with his stick, and out hopped a penny. The landlord opened his eyes, as you may fancy.
Hey, what'll you take for that hide?
"It's not for sale, my good man."
Will you take a gold piece?
"It's not for sale, I tell you. Hasn't it kept me and mine for years?"
And with that, Donal hit the hide another whack, and out jumped a second penny. Well, the long and the short of it was that Donal sold him the hide for a pocketful of gold pieces, and that very evening, who but he should walk up to Hudden's door.
"Good evening, Hudden. Will you lend me your best scales?"
Hudden stared, and Hudden scratched his head, but he lent the scales.
"Thank you. Thank you kindly."
When Donal was safe at home, he pulled out his pocketful of bright gold and began to weigh each piece in the scales. But Hudden had put a lump of butter at the bottom, and so the last piece of gold was sticking fast to the scales when he took them back to Hudden.
"Your scales. And many thanks, Hudden."
If Hudden had stared before, he stared 10 times more now. And no sooner was Donal's back turned than Hudden was off as hard as he could pelt to Dudden's.
Hey, Dudden, Dudden! That vagabond, bad luck to him.
You mean Donal O'Leary?
Who else should I mean? He's back here weighing out sackfuls of gold.
How do you know that?
Here are my scales he borrowed. And here's a gold piece sticking to them.
Oh!
Off they went together, and they came to Donal's door. Donal had finished making the last pile of gold pieces. In they walked, without an if you please or by your leave.
Well, I never.
Well, I never.
That was all they could say.
Good evening, Hudden. Good evening, Dudden. Ah, you thought you'd played me a fine trick, but you never did me a better turn in all your lives. When I found poor Daisy dead, I thought to myself, well, her hide may fetch something. And it did. Hides are worth their weight in gold in the market now.
Hudden nudged Dudden, and Dudden winked at Hudden.
Good evening, Donal O'Leary.
Good evening. Good evening, Donal.
Good evening, kind friends.
The next day, there wasn't a cow or a calf that belonged to Hudden or Dudden, but her hide was going to the fair in Hudden's biggest cart, drawn by Dudden's strongest pair of horses. When they came to the fair, each one took a hide over his arm, and then they were walking through the fair, bawling out at the top of their voices.
Hides to sell! Hides to sell!
Out came the tanner.
How much for your hides, my good men?
Their weight in gold.
What?
Their weight in gold.
It's early in the day to come out of the tavern.
That was all the tanner said, and back he went to his yard.
Hides to sell! Fine, fresh hides to sell!
Out came the cobbler.
How much for your hides, my men?
Their weight in gold.
Is it making game of me, yeah? Take that for your pains.
The cobbler dealt Hudden a blow that made him stagger.
Oh.
Up the people came running from one end of the fair to the other and crying.
What's the matter?
The cobbler told them.
Here are a couple of vagabonds selling hides at their weight in gold.
The innkeeper, who was the last to come up because he was so fat, bawled out.
Hey, hold 'em fast! Hold 'em fast! I'll wager it's one of the rogues who tricked me yesterday!
It was more kicks than halfpence that Hudden and Dudden got before they were well on their way home again. And they didn't run the slower because all the dogs of the town were at their heels. Well, as you may fancy, if they loved Donal a little before, they loved him less now. And as he saw them tearing along, their hats knocked in, and their coats torn off, and their faces black and blue, he cried,
What's the matter, friends? Is it fighting you've been? Or perhaps you met the police? Bad luck to them.
We'll police you, you vagabond.
It's mighty smart you thought yourself, deluding us with your lying tales.
Who deluded you? Didn't you see the gold with your own 2 eyes?
It's no use. Pay for it you must and shall.
There was a meal sack handy, and into it Hudden and Dudden popped Donal O'Leary.
Hey, hey!
Tied him up tight, ran a pole through the knot, and off they started for the brown lake of the bog, each with a pole end on his shoulder and Donal O'Leary between. But the brown lake was far, the road was dusty, Hudden and Dudden were sore and weary and parched with thirst. There was an inn by the roadside. Hudden said,
Let's go in. I'm dead beat. It's heavy he is for the little he's had to eat.
If Hudden was willing, so was Dudden. As for Donal, you may be sure his leave wasn't asked, but he was lumped down at the inn door for all the world as if he'd been a sack of potatoes. Dudden said,
Sit still, you vagabond. If we don't mind waiting, you needn't.
Donal kept quiet, but after a while he heard the glasses clink, and Hudden singing away at the top of his voice.
Sang on an ivy bush, and the song he
Then Donal started yelling.
I won't have her, I tell you. I won't have her.
But nobody heeded what he said, and he cried out again, this time much louder.
I won't have her, I tell you. I won't have her.
But still nobody heeded what he said, so he yelled as loud as ever he could.
I won't have her, I tell you. I won't have her.
Now, a farmer who had just come up with a drove of cattle and was turning in for a drink said to him,
And who won't you have? May I be so bold as to ask?
It's the king's daughter. They're bothering the life out of me to marry her.
Ooh, you're the lucky fellow. I'd give something to be in your shoes.
Do you see that now? Wouldn't it be a fine thing for a farmer to be marrying a princess, all dressed in gold and jewels?
Jewels, did you say? And now, couldn't you take me with you?
Well, you're an honest fellow, and as I don't care for the king's daughter, though she's as beautiful as the day, and is covered with jewels from top to toe, you shall have her. Just undo the cord and let me out. They tied me up tight, for they knew I'd run away from her.
Out crawled Donal, in crept the farmer.
Now, be still, and don't mind the shaking. It's only rumbling over the palace steps you'll be. And maybe they'll abuse you for a vagabond who won't have the king's daughter. But you needn't mind that. It's a deal I'm giving you, even though I don't care for the princess myself.
The farmer begged him,
Take my cattle in exchange.
and you may guess it wasn't long before Donal was at their tails, driving them homewards. Out came Hudden and Dudden.
He sang on an ivy bench, and the song he sang was the jug of
And
punch.
the one took one end of the pole and the other the other.
Oh, I'm thinking he's heavier.
Never mind. It's only a step now to the Brown Lake.
The farmer shouted from inside the sack.
I'll have her now! I'll have her now!
Hudden cried out,
By my faith, and you shall, though.
and he laid his stick across the sack.
Oh!
The farmer shouted louder than ever.
I'll have her! I'll have her!
They were now come to the Brown Lake, and unslinging the sack, they pitched it plump into the lake.
You'll not be playing your tricks on us any longer.
True for you. Ah, Donal, my boy, it was an ill day when you borrowed Hudden's scales.
Off they went with a light step and an easy heart. But when they were near home, who should they see but Donal O'Leary? And all around him the cows were grazing, and the calves were kicking up their heels and butting their heads together.
What? What? Is it you, Donal?
Faith, you've been quicker than we have.
True for you, Dudden, and let me thank you kindly. The turn was good if the will was ill. You'll have heard, like me, that the Brown Lake leads to the land of promise. I always put it down as lies, but it's just as true as my word. Look at the cattle.
Hudden stared and Dudden gaped, but they couldn't get over the cattle. Fine, fat cattle they were, too. Donal O'Leary smiled at them.
It's only the worst I could bring with me. The others were so fat, there was no driving them. Faith, too, it's little wonder they didn't care to leave, with grass as far as you could see, and as sweet and juicy as fresh butter.
No, Donal, we haven't always been friends. But as I was just saying to Hudden the other day, you were ever a decent lad.
What?
Hudden, Donal will show us the way. Won't you, Donal?
No, Dudden. I don't see that I'm called upon to do that. There's a power more cattle down there. Why shouldn't I have them all to myself?
Faith, they may well say, the richer you get, the harder the heart. You always were a neighbourly lad, Donal. You wouldn't wish to keep all the luck to yourself.
True for you, Hudden. Though 'tis a bad example you set me. But I'll not be thinking of old grudges. There is plenty for all there, so come along with me.
Good man.
Come on, then.
You're a true friend,
Not
Donal.
at all, not
Off they trudged with a light heart and an eager step. When they came to the brown lake, the sky was full of little white clouds. And if the sky was full of them, the lake was just as full.
Ah, now, look, there they are.
Donal pointed to the clouds in the lake.
Where?
There, can't you see?
Don't be greedy.
Then Dudden jumped his hardest to be up first with the fat cattle. But if he jumped first, Hudden wasn't long behind. They never came back. Maybe they got too fat, like the cattle. As for Donal O'Leary, he had cattle and sheep all his days to his heart's content. How Cormac MacArt went to Faery. Cormac, son of Art, son of Con of the 100 Battles, was High King of Ireland and held his court at Tara. One day he saw a youth upon the green, having in his hand a glittering fairy branch with 9 apples of red. And whensoever the branch was shaken, wounded men and women, enfeebled by illness, would be lulled to sleep by the sound of the very sweet fairy music which those apples uttered. Nor could anyone upon earth bear in mind any want, woe, or weariness of soul when that branch was shaken for him. Cormac asked the youth,
Is that branch thy own?
It is indeed mine.
Wouldst thou sell it? And what wouldst thou require for it?
Will you give me what I ask?
The king promised, and the youth then claimed his wife, his daughter, and his son. Sorrowful of heart was the king. Heaviness of heart filled his wife and children when they learned that they must part from him. But Cormac shook the branch amongst them. And when they heard the soft, sweet music of the branch, they forgot all care and sorrow, and went forth to meet the youth. And he and they took their departure, and were seen no more. Loud cries of weeping and mourning were made throughout Erin when this was known. But Cormac shook the branch so that there was no longer any grief or heaviness of heart upon anyone. After a year, Cormac said,
It is a year today since my wife, my son, and my daughter were taken from me. I will follow them by the same path that they took.
Cormac set off on his journey, and a dark, magical mist rose about him, and he chanced to come upon a wonderful, marvellous plain. Many horsemen were there, busy thatching a house with the feathers of foreign birds. When one side was thatched, they would go and seek more, and when they returned, not a feather was on the roof. Cormac gazed at them for a while, and then went forward. Again, he saw a youth dragging up trees to make a fire. But before the youth could find a second tree, the first one would be burnt. And it seemed to Cormac that this labour would never end. Cormac journeyed onwards until he saw 3 immense wells on the border of the plain. And from each well arose a man's head. From out the mouth of the first there flowed 2 streams. Into it there flowed one. The second had a stream flowing out of and another stream into its mouth, whilst 3 streams were flowing from the mouth of the third. Great wonder seized Cormac, and he said,
I should stay and gaze upon these wells, for I could find no man to tell me their story.
But he set onwards till he came to a house in the middle of a field. He entered. There sat within a tall couple, clad in many-hued garments, and they greeted the king and made him welcome for the night. Then the wife sent her husband to seek food. This he did, and soon returned with a huge wild boar upon his back and a log in his hand. He cast down the swine and the log upon the floor and said,
There is meat. Cook it for yourselves.
How can I do that?
I will teach you. Split this great log, make 4 pieces of it, and make 4 quarters of the hog. Put a log under each quarter. Tell a true story, and the meat will be cooked.
Then you yourself tell the first story, O man of the house.
7 pigs I have of the same kind as the one I brought, and I could feed the world with them. For if a pig is killed, I have but to put its bones into the sty again, and it will be found alive the next morning.
The story was true, and a quarter of the pig was cooked. Then Cormac said,
Woman of the house, you tell a story.
I have 7 white cows, and they fill 7 cauldrons with milk every day. And I give my word that they yield as much milk as would satisfy the men of the whole world if they were out on yonder plain drinking it.
And is that a true tale?
That story was true, and a second quarter of the pig was cooked. Cormac was bidden now to tell a story for his quarter, and he told how he was upon a search for his wife, his son, and his daughter, that had been borne away from him a year before by a youth with a fairy branch.
If what thou sayest be true, thou art indeed Cormac, son of Art, son of Con of the 100 Battles.
Truly I am.
That story was true, and a quarter of the pig was cooked.
Eat thy meal now.
I never ate before with only 2 people in my company.
Wouldst thou eat it with 3 others?
If they were dear to me, I would.
Then the door opened, and there entered the wife and children of Cormac. Great was his joy and his exultation.
Wife.
Oh, husband.
Oh, my children.
Then Manannán mac Lir, lord of the fairy host, appeared before him in his own true form, and said thus,
I it was, Cormac, who bore away these 3 from thee. I it was who gave thee this branch, so that I might bring thee here. Eat now and drink.
I would do so, could I learn the meaning of the wonders I saw today.
Thou shalt learn them. The horsemen, thatching the roof with feathers, are a likeness of people who go forth into the world to seek riches and fortune. When they return, their houses are bare, and so they go on forever. The young man dragging up the trees to make a fire is a likeness of those who labor for others. Much trouble they have, but they never warm themselves at the fire. The 3 heads in the wells are 3 kinds of men. Some there are who give freely when they get freely. Some who give freely though they get little. Some who get much and give little. And they, Cormac, are the worst of the 3.
After that, Cormac and his wife and his children sat down, and a tablecloth was spread before them. And Manannán spoke again.
That is a very precious thing before thee. There is no food, however delicate, that shall be asked of this tablecloth, but it will gladly give it.
That is well.
After that, Manannán brought out a goblet and set it upon his palm.
This cup has these virtues, that it will fill itself with any drink you may desire. And when a false story is told before it, it breaks into 4 pieces. And when a true story is related, it is made whole again.
Those are very precious things you have, Manannán.
They shall all be thine, the goblet, the branch, and the tablecloth.
Then they ate their meal, and that meal was good, for they could not think of any meat, but they got it upon the tablecloth, nor of any drink, but they got it in the cup. Great thanks did they give to Manannán. When they had eaten their meal, they laid down to slumber and sweet sleep. And where they rose on the morrow morn was in Tara of the Kings, and by their side were tablecloth, cup, and branch. Thus did Cormac fare at the court of Manannán, and this is the true story of how he was given the fairy branch.
The Black Horse. Once there was a king, and he had 3 sons. And when the king died, they didn't give a shade of anything to the youngest son, but an old, white, limping donkey. And he was going along with it right before him, sometimes walking, sometimes riding, when what should he see coming out of the heart of the western hills towards him but a rider, riding high, well, and right well, who cried out,
"Hail, king's son! I'm after breaking my heart riding this villain of a horse. Will you give me the limping white donkey for him? Oh, you needn't fear. There's no saying but that you might make better use of him than I. He has one value. There's no single place that you can think of in the 4 parts of the wheel of the world that the black horse will not take you there."
So the king's son got the black horse, and he gave the limping white donkey. Where should he think of going when he mounted but to the realm under waves? He went, and before sunrise on the morrow he was there. What should he find when he got there but the son of the king under waves holding a court, and the people of the realm gathered to see if there was anyone who would undertake to seek the daughter of the king of the Greeks to be the prince's wife. No one came forward, when who should come up but the young lad riding the black horse. And the son of the king under waves said,
"You, rider of the black horse, I lay you under crosses and under spells to have the daughter of the king of the Greeks here before the sun rises tomorrow."
He went out, and he reached the black horse, and leaned his elbow on its mane, and he heaved a sigh. And the horse said,
"Sigh of a king's son under spells. But have no care. We shall do the thing that was set before you."
And so off they went. The horse then said,
"Now, when we get near the great town of the Greeks, you will notice that the 4 feet of a horse never went to the town before. The king's daughter, looking out of a window, will see me, and she will not be content without a turn of a ride upon me. Say that she may have that, but the horse will suffer no man but you to ride before a woman on him."
They came near the big town, and he gave a great display of horsemanship, and the princess was looking out of the window, and noticed the horse. The horsemanship pleased her, and she came out and said,
Give me a ride on the horse.
You shall have that. But the horse will let no man ride him before a woman, but me.
I have a horseman of my own.
But before her horseman mounted at all, the horse lifted his legs and kicked him off.
Come then yourself and mount before me. I won't leave the matter so.
He mounted the horse and she behind him, and before she could blink an eyelid, she was nearer sky than earth. He was in realm Underwaves with her before sunrise. Prince Underwave said,
You are come.
I am come.
You are the son of a king, but I am a son of success. Anyhow, we shall have no delay or neglect now, but a wedding.
Just gently. Your wedding is not so short a way off as you suppose. Till I get the silver cup that my grandmother had at her wedding, and that my mother had as well, I will not marry, for I need to have it at my own wedding.
You, rider of the black horse, I set you under spells and under crosses unless the silver cup is here before dawn tomorrow.
Out he went to the black horse and leaned his elbow on its mane and heaved a sigh, and the horse said,
Sigh of a king's son under spells. Mount, and you shall get the silver cup. The people of the realm are gathered about the king of the Greeks tonight, for he has missed his daughter. And when you get to the palace, go in and leave me outside. They will have the cup there, going round the company. Go in and sit in their midst. Say nothing, and seem to be one of the people of the palace. But when the cup comes round to you, take it under your arm and come out to me with it, and we'll go.
Away they went, and they got to Greece. And he went into the palace and did as the black horse instructed. He took the cup, came out, and mounted. And before sunrise he was in the realm Underwaves. Prince Underwaves said,
You are come.
I am come.
Then, princess, we had better get married now.
Slowly and softly. I will not marry till I get the silver ring that my grandmother and my mother wore when they were wedded.
You, rider of the black horse, do that. Let's have the ring here tomorrow at sunrise.
The lad went to the black horse and leaned his elbow on its mane and told him how it was. And the horse said,
There never was a matter set before me harder than this. But there's no help for it at any rate. Mount me. There is a snow mountain and an ice mountain and a mountain of fire between us and the winning of that ring. It is right hard for us to pass them.
Thus they went as they were, and as they came near the snow mountain, he struck the horse, and in one bound the black horse was on top of the snow mountain. At the next bound he was on top of the ice mountain. At the third bound he went through the flames of the fire mountain, and down he went to a town below. He said to the lad,
Go to a smithy. Make an iron spike for every bone end in me.
Off he went as the horse desired, and he got the spikes made, and back he came with them.
Stick them into me, every spike of them and every bone end that I have.
This he did. He stuck the spikes into the horse.
There is a lake here, 4 miles long and 4 miles wide, and when tonight I go out into it, the lake will take fire and blaze. If you see the lake on fire going out before the sun rises, expect me. And if not, go your way.
Out went the black horse into the lake, and the lake became flame. Long he waited. Dawn came, and the lake fire did not go out. Just when the sun was about to rise, the lake fire went out. And the black horse rose in the middle of the water with one single spike in him, and the ring upon its point. The horse said,
Mount, and let us be gone.
He mounted on the black horse, and away they went. He reached the mountains, and the horse leapt at the fire mountain and was on the top. From the mountain of fire he leapt to the mountain of ice, and from the mountain of ice to the mountain of snow. He put the mountains past him, and by morning he was in the realm Underwaves. And the prince said,
You are come.
I am come.
That's true. A king's son are you, but a son of success am I. We shall have no more mistakes and delays, but a wedding this time.
Go easy. Your wedding is not so near as you think yet. Till you make me a castle castle. I won't marry you.
You, rider of the black horse, make a castle before the morrow's sun rises.
The lad went out to the horse and leaned his elbow on its mane and sighed, thinking that this castle could never be made. But the black horse said,
There never came a turn in my road yet that is easier for me to pass than this.
The lad glanced and saw ever so many builders and stonemasons at work, and the castle was ready before the sun rose. He shouted at Prince Underwaves, who, when he saw the castle, could scarcely believe his eyes. But he said,
Rider of the black horse, you are a son of success, but I am a son of success too. There will be no more mistakes and delays, but a wedding now.
No. Should we not go to look at the castle? There's time enough to get married before the night comes.
They went to the castle, and the castle was without a fault. But Prince Underwaves objected.
I see one. One want at least to be made good. A well to be made inside, so that water may not be far to fetch when there's a feast or a wedding in the castle.
The rider of the black horse told him it would be done at once. The well was made, and it was 7 fathoms deep and 2 or 3 fathoms wide. And they looked at the well on the way to the wedding.
It is good, but for one little fault yonder.
What fault? Where?
There.
Prince Underwaves bent down to look. She put her 2 hands at his back and cast him in.
Be thou there. If I go to be married, thou art not the man. But the man who did each exploit that has been done, if he chooses, him will I have.
Away she went with the rider of the little black horse to the wedding. At the end of 3 years after that, he suddenly remembered the black horse. He got up and went out, and found him just where he left him. He said he was very sorry he'd forgotten him. The black horse answered,
Never mind. Raise your sword and smite off my head.
But fortune will not allow that I should do that.
Do it instantly, or I will do it to you.
So the lad drew his sword and smote off the horse's head, and with a heavy heart uttered a doleful cry. Then what should he hear behind him but...
All hail, friend.
He looked behind him, and there was the finest man he ever set eyes upon, who said,
Why do you weep for the black horse?
Because there never was born to man or beast a creature in this world of whom I was more fond.
Would you take me for friend in place of him?
If I could think you the horse, I would. But if not, I would rather the horse.
I am the black horse. How else should you have all these things that you went to seek in the house of the king of the Greeks? He is my father. And since I was put under a spell, many a man have I met before you. They had but one word amongst them. They could not keep me nor manage me, and they never kept me a couple of days. But you kept me till the time ran out that was to come from the spell. And now, let us make your wedding feast in my father's house.
Andrew Coffey.
Andrew Coffey, Andrew Coffey, Andrew Coffey.
My grandfather, Andrew Coffey, was known to the whole neighbourhood as a quiet, decent man. And if the whole neighbourhood knew him, he knew the whole neighbourhood. Every inch, hill and dale, bog and pasture, field and covert. Fancy his surprise one evening when he found himself in a part of the countryside he couldn't recognise a bit. He and his good horse kept stumbling up against some tree or stumbling down into some bog hole that by rights oughtn't to be there. On the top of all that, the rain came pelting down whenever there was a clearing, and the cold March wind tore through the trees. Glad he was then when he saw a light in the distance, and drawing near found a cabin. Though for the life of him he couldn't think how it came there. However, in he walked, after tying up his horse, and right welcome was the brushwood fire blazing on the hearth. And there stood a chair right and tight that seemed to say, "Come, sit down in me." There wasn't a soul else in the room. Well, he did sit himself down and got a little warm and cheered after his drenching. But all the while he was wondering and wondering.
Andrew Coffey. Andrew Coffey.
Good heavens! Who was calling him and not a soul in sight? Look around as he might, indoors and out, he could find no creature with 2 legs, or 4, for his horse was gone.
Andrew Coffey. Andrew Coffey. Tell me a story.
It was louder this time, and it was nearer. And then what a thing to ask for. It was bad enough not to be let sit by the fire and dry oneself without being bothered for a story.
Andrew Coffey. Andrew Coffey. Tell me a story, or it'll be the worse for you.
My poor grandfather was so dumbfounded that he could only stand and stare.
Andrew Coffey. Andrew Coffey. I told you it'll be the worst for you.
And with that, out there bounced from a cupboard that Andrew Coffey had never noticed before, a man. And the man was in a towering rage. But it wasn't that. And he carried as fine a blackthorn as you'd wish to crack a man's head with. But it wasn't that either. But when my grandfather clapped eyes on him, he knew him for Patrick Rooney. And all the world knew he'd gone overboard fishing one night long years before. Andrew Coffey would neither stop nor stay, but he took to his heels and was out of the house as hard as he could. He ran and he ran, taking little thought of what was before, till at last he ran up against a big tree. And then he sat down to rest. He hadn't been sitting for more than a moment when he heard voices.
Oh, it's heavy he is, the vagabond.
Steady now. We'll rest when we get under the big tree yonder.
Now that happened to be the tree under which Andrew Coffey was sitting. At least he thought so. For seeing a branch handy, he swung up by it and was soon snugly hidden away.
Better see than be seen.
The rain had stopped and the wind fallen. The night was blacker than ever, but Andrew Coffey could see 4 men. And they were carrying between them a long box. Under the tree they came, set the box down, opened it, and who should they bring out but Patrick Rooney? Never a word did he say, and he looked as pale as old snow. Well, one gathered brushwood, and another took out tinder and flint, And soon they had a big fire roaring. And my grandfather could see Patrick plainly enough. If he had kept still before, he kept stiller now. Soon they had 4 poles up and a pole across, right over the fire, for all the world like a spit. And onto the pole they slung Patrick Rooney. One of them said,
"He'll do well enough, but who's to mind him whilst we're away? Who'll turn the fire? Who'll see that he doesn't burn?"
With that, Patrick opened his lips and spoke.
Andrew Coffey, Andrew Coffey, Andrew Coffey, Andrew Coffey, Andrew Coffey. You'd better come down, Andrew Coffey.
I'm much obliged to you, gentlemen, but indeed I know nothing about the business.
Andrew Coffey decided he'd better come down. The 4 men went off, and he was left all alone with Patrick. Then Andrew Coffey sat and kept the fire even, and he kept the spit turning, and Patrick tied to it. And on every turn, Patrick glared at him. Poor Andrew Coffey couldn't make it out at all. And he stared at Patrick and at the fire. And he thought of the little house in the wood till he felt quite dazed.
But it's burning me.
I'm sure I beg your pardon, but might I ask you a question?
If you want a crooked answer, keep turning or it'll be the worse for you.
But my grandfather couldn't get it out of his head. Hadn't everybody, far and near, said that Patrick had fallen overboard? Well, there was enough to think about, and my grandfather did think.
Andrew Coffey, Andrew Coffey, it's burning me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I won't do it again.
You'd better not.
And Patrick gave him a cock of his eye and a grin of his teeth. That just sent a shiver down Andrew Coffey's back. Well, it was odd that here he should be in a thick wood he had never set eyes upon, turning Patrick Rooney upon a spit. You can't wonder at my grandfather thinking and not minding the fire.
Andrew Coffey, Andrew Coffey, it's the death of you will be.
And with that, what did my grandfather see but Patrick unslinging himself from the spit, and his eyes glared, and his teeth glistened. It was neither stop nor stay my grandfather made, but out he ran into the dark of the wood. It seemed to him there wasn't a stone but was for his stumbling, not a branch but beat his face, not a bramble but tore his skin. And whenever it was clear, the rain pelted down, and the cold March wind howled along. Glad he was to see a light.
Oh, thank goodness.
And a minute after, he was kneeling, dazed, drenched and bedraggled by the hearthside. The brushwood flamed, and the brushwood crackled, and soon my grandfather began to feel a little warm and dry, and easy in his mind.
Andrew Coffey, Andrew Coffey.
It's hard for a man to jump when he's been through all my grandfather had, but jump he did. And when he looked around, where should he find himself but in the very cabin he had first met Patrick in?
Andrew Coffey, tell me a story.
But my grandfather was as bold as maybe, for he was just tired of being frightened.
Is it a story you want? Well, if you can tell me the rights of this one, I'll be thankful.
And he told the tale of what had befallen him from first to last that night. The tale was long, and maybe Andrew Coffey was weary. It's asleep he must have fallen, for when he awoke, he lay on the hillside under the open heavens, and his horse grazed at his side.